escaping the realm of darkness. The paranormal guys are on a quest to find the answers to the hard questions of where the normal meets the paranormal and the weird, and where the natural meets the unnatural. So grab your holy water, call your mama, and get ready for the Paranormal Guys Podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Neal with the Paranormal Guys Podcast, and this is my other host, Stephen Leinweber. What's up, Steve?
Hey, I put the pair in paranormal.
Yeah, that means two. Yeah,
yes,
yeah, you're good with this. Let me tell you. Wow.
Nice.
So, welcome in, everybody. Steve threw me off on that a little bit. This is actually our first episode of the Paranormal Guys Podcast. This is being recorded on 9/4/2022 and will be broadcast for our first episode on
10/6/2022.
I was thinking of something else for a second. 10/6/2022. And tonight's episode is going to be a really cool one, our first episode. And I couldn't think of somebody much better than Archbishop Kristina Rake to speak about this. We're going to be talking about the Book of Enoch, Steve.
Yeah. Dude, I've been reading the Book of Enoch.
Yeah.
It's very interesting text. I don't know if I should take it very literally, but that's why we have Bishop Rake as our guest tonight, right, to help us, guide us through the Book of Enoch.
Me and Steve, we own a company called Graveside Paranormal, and this is our podcast, the Paranormal Guys Podcast. We originally, we do ghost tours throughout the Chicagoland area. We've been doing it for about the past 7 years. We also we did a podcast before called Spirits by the Graveside. But when we were doing Spirits by the Graveside, Steve, we were doing it during the COVID era just to see if we could do it. But like I said, me and Steve are paranormal investigators. Mm-hmm. We actually do small little documentaries. We also have a YouTube channel called Graveside, SIDE, paranormal.com. Well, Graveside Paranormal on YouTube. We also have gravesideparanormal.com. What we want to do is we want to bring up this podcast that we were originally doing up a notch. And so we came up with this idea called the Paranormal Guys Podcast. And me and Steve, we work very, very hard on a lot of things that we do. And one of the main reasons is we want to bring it out to you, our audience, subjects. And when you guys want to know about certain subjects or something like that, we want you to be able to interact with us. You would basically go to Neal, Neal, at gravesideparanormal.com, or Steve at gravesideparanormal.com, or info@gravesideparanormal.com.
We have many ways you can reach us.
So, Steve, tell us what's been going on with you, man.
Let's see what's been going on. It's been a while since we did a podcast together, and it's kind of weird because I've always been in the background. Mm-hmm. And so now people are going to see me up front in kind of center with you.
Yeah, like a lot of people don't know is that actually with the original podcast, we went through some different changes and this and that. Steve has always been the producer of our podcasts. So when it was Spirits by the Graveside, he was basically the producer, but he would come in and out and, give his, what he thought of something. But now it's just me and him doing this. So we're doing a whole new show for everybody. And we're going to try and make it very entertaining because we are two guys who are just very interested in the paranormal, the supernatural. Not only that, but aliens, cryptids, anything odd or weird. We're willing to talk. Conspiracies. We're going to be doing that sometime soon. So me and Steve are going to be doing a lot of this for you. So make sure that you send us some subject matter, and feel free to come into the Chicagoland area this October because we are going to be having our new ghost tours. Steve, let's talk about our ghost tours for a second, man.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit coming up. We got quite a bit coming up in October, don't we?
Yeah, we got a lot going on. So for the first time ever, I got a phone call from a priest from St. James Cemetery. I was at the gym trying to get my swole on, trying to build up those muscles. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I got this phone call, and it was Father Tom. He called me. He goes, I heard that you left a message for me. And I asked him, I said, listen, I go, my audience, our audience, me and Steve's audience, we would love to be able to get into St. James Cemetery, otherwise known as Monk's Castle. It has so many legendary folklore stories. He said, that's fine. He goes, that's fine, but please don't be doing any spiritual stuff inside there. It is a Catholic cemetery. So we got our foot in the door, and we appreciate that. So what we want to do is this October, it's only on 3 select dates. He was only able to give me 3, and I appreciate just giving me 3. So it'll be October 22nd, 28th, and 29th at 8 o'clock. We're going to probably be leaving from Chet's Melly Lounge, the legendary Chet's Melly Lounge, known for like Resurrection Mary, Steve.
All right. So basically, when we get there, Father Tom's going to open the gates, right? And then we're going to be able to go right in, and we're going to be inside St. James Cemetery, not outside the gates looking in, inside the cemetery, to experience it in the evening and during Halloween season. That is freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's never been done before. I mean, he was so great to give this to us. I'm gracious for it, man. I really am. If I can. Sometimes we get things from our customers. Hey, it would have been great if we could have went inside this one cemetery in the Chicagoland area. They're Catholic cemeteries. Not every one can you go into. Some you can, but some you just can't. And these big iron gates are going to be open for us, and it's going to be awesome.
Tell us about why do they call it Monk's Castle?
Well, there was a thing in 1977 where a Cook County Sheriff's Department officer was going up and down Archer Avenue late at night, and he saw what he thought were like kids in the cemetery or something like that, or dark figures in the cemetery. So as he pulled up even closer and he shined a light, he described them as actually floating, and they look like monks floating up into the cemetery area. It also has a couple other stories, but we won't give away all the stories, Steve. Because we need people to come out. And
but people do see these things to this day. Even
people have said that they've seen them. Saying and me finding the truth are two different things.
Right, and that's why we're going to go there.
Yeah, so we're going to go there. You can take all the pictures you want. We can give you guys an EMF, but we're not going to be using like spirit boxes or any of that kind of stuff there. We're just going to tell legendary stories. But
we will have that equipment for the other places.
We're definitely going to have that because we're going to be starting actually October 8th, Steve. So I'm really excited. And the Roth House. The Roth House, the legendary Roth House. Where Miss Michelle Ward is going to be doing an investigation for 12 people at the legendary Roth House on the 29th of October, Saturday the 29th. And today I just talked to John, the owner of the place. For the people in Watsika, Illinois, I heard you. I listened to you. You guys want something? Yes, I did. I listened. I try to listen to all of our customers. You guys want something at a little bit better price and be able to have a small investigation for yourself. So me and Steve and the rest of the group of Graveside Paranormal are going to be able to do that for you on the 16th from 2 o'clock till 8 o'clock at night. We're going to do walkthrough tours. And the cool thing is just like Graveside Paranormal always does. We always let you record everything, and we send it to your email. We send it to your email, and then you become the investigator, and you're able to figure it out for yourself if you found something, and then you send it back to us to show us the evidence.
Yeah, so we might highlight it here.
What's that?
We might highlight it here.
Yes, we definitely would highlight it here. I'll tell you that. If something comes out very strong and bold, well, then, yes, we're going to make sure that we highlight it. That's a guarantee. Yep. So we welcome people out. If anybody who hears us in any other state or anything like that, come on out for October, and especially in the Chicagoland area, come out for us with us. I think I've said enough right now, Steve. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good time. Good time.
All right. So as always, we always go after we and Steve do a little talk. I think we're going to go right into the news.
Did you know that there is a haunted hotel for sale in Wisconsin? I know that you wanted to buy one, and so this story is right up your alley. It's in a place called Humbird, Wisconsin. Humbird, Wisconsin. There's a hotel for sale called the Humbird Hotel Bar and Grill. It's a 150-year-old establishment. It has 6 guest rooms, a bar and a grill. It's very haunted, a long history of different paranormal activity occurring in the hotel. And in part of the real estate advertisement, they disclose that this place is haunted. They don't know if it's going to detract from a potential buyer or if it's going to attract a potential buyer. Let me ask you, Neal, what do you think? Does telling most people a place is haunted going to attract a buyer or make them not interested?
Well, I mean, if you're putting something just on a regular market without telling people, then it's not going to attract a regular buyer. But if you're putting it out to the paranormal community, then hell yeah, you're going to attract that community. And there's going to be somebody who has a couple of dollars in their pocket are going to be like, oh yeah, I think I can do something here. Not only can I enjoy doing it and being able to do myself a little documentary and have some fun, but then I can also put it out there for the public to come on in. So if it's something that's a draw that works out for everybody, everybody's happy, you make some money, and everybody's happy at the end, then that's a good thing. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree. And if you want to learn more about this, we'll have a link in the description. The article is on Coast to Coast AM. And you can find all about it. If you do end up buying it, if you're a listener of this podcast and you end up buying the Humbird Hotel, Bar, and Grill, please remember you heard it from us first. And if you want, maybe Neal and I will come out and investigate it for you.
Yeah, and we'll do it for free. If you remember us, we'll do it for free. But hold on, let me reiterate. I do like pizza.
That's what I was saying. It's a bar and grill. How about a beer and a burger?
All right, fair enough.
All right. Let's not sell ourselves short here. We're professionals.
We're professionals, damn it. All right. So moving on to the news. Now, we live in the Chicagoland area, and there's a certain man, announcer for the Chicago White Sox. He was originally with the Chicago Cubs with Harry Carey. He is named by the name of Steve Stone. Supposedly, Steve Stone might be psychic. Yeah. He might have premonitions of something that happens before it happens, which is odd. Let me read it here. An announcer for the Chicago White Sox says that he can see into the future, and his broadcast partner has actually backed up the bold claim after watching him perform the feat on numerous occasions. The former Cy Young winner and current TV analyst for the team of the Chicago White Sox, Steve Stone revealed his unique gift to the Chicago Sun-Times in an enlightening profile piece over the weekend. Not afraid to mince words, he genuinely declared to the newspaper that I've been psychic my whole life. I know it sounds strange, but I really know what's going to happen. So he knows if it's going to be a ball or strike or if someone's going to be coming up and hit a home run. But he never says anything. And there's people who said that he said things before it's happened, like his partner on the Chicago White Sox. And I guess things have happened. So I guess there is some proof in the pudding with that.
Have you ever seen that movie Next with Nicolas Cage?
I don't know. I don't think I have.
He's a psychic, right? You got to watch this movie, Neal. Next with Nicolas Cage. Our viewers will know. He is like a performer in Vegas, and he can see just a few minutes into the future, right? And so it's just Nicolas Cage being Nicolas Cage going out there and being psychic. You'll love the movie, but it just makes me wonder if Steve Stone has been secretly like this superhero kind of guy all along and just not saying anything. But maybe he didn't want to disappoint people that the Cubs are going to lose all the time.
We see he's with the White Sox now, and the Cubs aren't doing that great. I mean, not that the White Sox are doing awesome this year, but they're only 2 games back right now. So everybody knows I'm a Sox fan, not a Cubs fan. Get that right. So, yeah, that's and number one. You said Nicolas Cage. All you have to do is say Nicolas Cage, and damn, I'm going to watch that movie this weekend.
Yeah, let's watch it. You'd love it.
Anything with Nicolas Cage is good, man. Mm-hmm. Did you know that Nicolas Cage was actually supposed to be Superman some years ago?
Wow. Yeah, what happened with that? I thought he was going to be Batman, but no.
He was supposed to be Superman. He was supposed to be Superman.
I don't know if I'd buy it like Clark Kent as Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, I don't know about that either. I don't mean to get too sidetracked, but you said Nicolas Cage. I love Nicolas Cage.
Cage. Well, there you go.
But since we're talking about movies, there's a movie actually on Netflix. We bring up entertainment. It's called Day Shift with Jamie Foxx.
Day Shift.
Yeah, Day Shift. It's a vampire movie. It has Jamie Foxx, Dave Franco, and Snoop Dogg. And let me tell you something, dude. Snoop Dogg is badass in this movie, man.
Have you seen it?
What's that?
Have you seen this?
Oh, yeah.
It's out already?
Yeah, it's out on Netflix. As you can see down at the bottom, it says it came out August 12th.
Oh, it's already past August 12th. Okay.
Man, you're good at this, man.
Yeah, thank you.
So This thing was actually really good. It was very entertaining. There's nothing really bad or vulgar about it. The whole family actually can watch this. It's very entertaining to me. Yeah, there's some blood and stuff like that, but that's a vampire movie. Come on, man. It's called Day Shift. Some jobs really go for the throat, that says. I'm going to tell you something. I recommend this movie with Jamie Foxx, Dave Franco, and, of course, Snoop Dogg. Who doesn't want to see Snoop Dogg in a movie, man? Especially probably when he's the baddest ass in the movie. Come on, man.
So is this like, I'm looking at the picture, right? Is it like the guys are good guys and the ladies are vampires?
No, not all the girls are vampires. The one in the center there, though, is a vampire. The one in, like, the purple.
She looks like a politician.
She looks like a politician.
Like a mean politician. I don't know. Where yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I like to see this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good. So I recommend that to everybody to go ahead and see. And once again, I welcome everybody into our new podcast, the Paranormal Guys podcast. Up next, we're going to get some messages from Graveside Paranormal, and then we'll be leading into with Archbishop Kristina Rake, the Book of Enoch, and the Nephilim.
Hey, boils and ghouls, it's spooky season again, and Graveside Paranormal is ready to give you the best tours that we can give you. Come on out this year, starting on October 8th, and we have a special tour coming out. Other than our nightlife tour, we have the Monks tour, which will be on the 22nd, the 28th, and 29th for the first time ever. Monks Gates is going to be opened up for us, and we're going to be able to go in there and tell you all the wonderful, scary stories. So come on out if you want to have a good time and get a little spooky. Boo.
And now, back to the Paranormal Guys podcast.
All right, we're back. Once again, I'm Neal, and this is Steve of the Paranormal Podcast, Paranormal Guys Podcast. Paranormal Guys Podcast.
Premiere episode.
Yeah, so this is our new podcast, and let's get right into our subject matter for today.
We've got a great guest.
What's that?
We got a great guest.
Oh, awesome guest. Heck yeah. I didn't want to say hell yeah, but heck yeah.
not in front of Bishop.
No, don't do that kind of stuff, man. Come on. It's kid friendly. Come on.
Yes.
All right. Archbishop Kristina Rake, welcome to the Paranormal Guys.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you coming on. I really, truly do. So we brought you on here. We want to talk about more. I go around and I talk to a lot of friends who are in the paranormal community, and this subject comes up a lot. And I don't think everybody has decisive answers in the Book of Enoch. I think that there's a lot of different scenarios and theories out there of the Book of Enoch, as well as the Nephilim. So that's why I brought you in, because I think you're more of an expert than, of course, me and Stephen. Like I said, we're just jacks of the trade who try to learn a little bit of everything. And because we're no experts at anything.
We're just the paranormal guys.
We're just the pair of normal guys. That's all we are. That's all we are. So once again, I welcome you in. But I'd like to ask you, I would like to start off by asking you, what is the Book of Enoch? And why are the sons of God in the Book of Enoch?
Well, the phrase sons of God is very vague. But talking about the Book of Enoch, there's a bunch of books that were written during the time before Jesus. We call it the Inter-Testamental Period, which means in between the total completion of the Old Testament and the birth of Christ, also referred to as the Second Temple Period, because the Jewish temple had been destroyed by Babylon and Assyria, and it was rebuilt. And so that period of about 500 years between the building of the Second Temple that Jesus knew and the birth of Christ in the New Testament, there were many, many books written during that period that Jesus quoted from, the apostles quoted from, they knew very well, and that the Jews of the time period also used. And so the Book of Enoch is one of those. It was never incorporated into the official Old Testament or the official collection of books used by the Christian Church, which until the year 1532 meant the Catholic Church. But it was part of the Old Testament and is of the Coptic Church, which is the Ethiopian Catholic Church, and of the Eastern churches, the Russian Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox churches. Enoch is in their Old Testament. And the book, which you have to understand the way the Jewish people understood the Old Testament, they're not scripture alone. If that were the case, they wouldn't celebrate Hanukkah, because the story of Hanukkah is in the Catholic Old Testament, but not the Jewish Old Testament, and it's not in King James. So all of these stories were part of what we call tradition, and the tales about the stories from Scripture as these people began to delve more deeply into what God had revealed and telling stories about what God had revealed and making sense of what God had revealed, you get this intertestamental literature. It's also called Apocrypha. And it's not bad. It's not something you avoid. It's taught in all seminaries, all these books, and I've got these massive things. These are just the books written before the time of Christ that were not included in the Old Testament.
Dear Lord.
So there's nothing wrong with them. And in the case of Enoch, so much of it is quoted in the New Testament. And in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, there's one line. There's one line, and it says that, and the sons of God became enamored with the daughters of men and had relations and gave birth to the Nephilim, which is Hebrew for the fallen ones, the Nephilim, and that the Nephilim were the giants, the heroes of old.
Right.
Now, Psalm 89 refers to a council of the gods, referred to as the sons of God, and maybe referring to that. But the notion of the sons of God and the Nephilim became a more richly diverse, or a deeper story after Genesis. It's the Jewish people. This was in their book, and they started to really understand the fallen ones. But what's interesting is in the book of Enoch, a fallen angel named Azazel is mentioned. Mm-hmm. Azazel is also mentioned in the book of Leviticus. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest gets a goat, and he whispers the sins of the people into the ear of the goat, and he paints the name Azazel on the goat, because the goat is Azazel's, and then he smacks it on the rear and sends it off into the forest. That's where we get the term scapegoat. Really? Because the goat has the sins of the people sent off, but the goat is Azazel's. It's actually in there, and Azazel in the book of Enoch is mentioned as one of the angels who fell, because he agreed with one of his brother angels that it was okay to have sex with human women and to give birth to this race of giants. So when we say Enoch isn't in the Old Testament, references to it are in the Old Testament all throughout. So we have to understand that sometimes something didn't make it in the Bible, but the whole notion that our faith is only bound by what's in there is a new notion that wasn't part of Judaism or Christianity until, like I said, 1532 AD with Martin Luther.
Right.
Now, the Book of Enoch, who do you believe it was originally written by?
Well, we don't know. There's a term for that. It's called pseudepigrapha or pseudepigrapha. And these are works that aren't in the Old Testament, but they're always attributed to a major Old Testament figure. And so this book is attributed to Enoch, and he is the only patriarch in the book of Genesis who we are told never died. Right. He was taken physically into heaven, or assumed into heaven. Like we say, Our Lady was assumed into heaven, and Elijah was assumed into heaven. But Enoch and Elijah are the only two that are mentioned that they never died. They were just taken by God into heaven without passing through death. So this book of Enoch is attributed to Enoch, And it's actually broken into pieces by scripture scholars. There's the Book of Watchers, there's the Animal Apocalypse, there's all these different little pieces of it that relate to stories in the Old Testament, kind of answering questions like, why did the snake speak in the Garden of Eden? Well, in the Book of Enoch, in what's called the Animal Apocalypse, which is chapter 85, it says, oh, all the animals talked before the fall. And it's got all the animals having conversations with each other. But pseudepigrapha is always attributed to a figure that was major at the time. There's New Testament apocrypha and pseudepigrapha attributed to Paul and Peter and Thomas and Bartholomew. Same thing.
Mm-hmm. What about, now there were two actual Enochs. One came from Cain, was actually a child from Cain or his lineage. And then there was from Seth. How do we know which Enoch is the book talking about?
Well, there are legends outside of those things, and what we're talking about when we give it the pseudepigrapha a name, this is to whom this is attributed, and looking at it from an academic perspective really doesn't matter, because we don't know who wrote it, but it's part of this body of literature that we call Enochian. And right. The Enochian literature is all about the angelic interaction with human beings. So even though different Old Testament figures might have the same name, the Book of Enoch is attributed to the Enoch who was taken physically into heaven. And the assumption is that's because he had some special divine knowledge, and because the Book of Enoch actually refers to these visions and this extra, knowledge that he couldn't possibly have had. He wasn't in the Garden of Eden. It's referring to the one who is taken physically up into heaven.
Yeah, he couldn't have been in the Garden of Eden because his ancestor, Adam and Eve, were in the Garden of Eden. And one of the things that I think is that the interpretation, could it be, let me put it this way, could the Book of Enoch be a very well-written, bizarre story, kind of like a Harry Potter type movie? And I'm part of my ignorance for that. But could it be something like that just for readers?
Actually, much of the pseudepigrapha is the Jewish nation after it's we have to understand, let me back up a little bit about history. There were two kingdoms, and they're mentioned throughout the Old Testament. Once King Solomon died, the kingdom of Israel broke into two. There was Judah, which had Jerusalem in it, made up of two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and then the 10 tribes in the north were Israel, and they hated each other. In the New Testament, these northern tribes are called Samaria, the Samaritans. And in the south, you still have the Israelites. And both of those countries got sacked, destroyed, and all of the Jews in them got carted away. Babylon in the south, but then Assyria took over Babylon and then took Israel. And then Assyria was taken over by Persia. So you had the influences of Egypt, of Assyria, Greece, which also took over Persia. So as the Jewish people, they have their law, they have their revelation, but they're encountering these other ideas. And it's not that those ideas made people go, oh, we want a little bit of this and that, as if it's not true. But those ideas start to spark theological thought. Like, I'll encounter something in Islam and go, oh my God, that makes so much sense when Jesus said this. It's just about looking more deeply into your faith. And as they do that, the tales that they told get written down and expanded on. You have to understand that in Judaism, it was illegal to write certain things down. The Torah was written down. That's the law that God gave on Mount Sinai. But there was the oral Torah, and they were forbidden from writing it down. So much of Judaism, even to this day, is rote memorization. They memorized these stories. Yes, they were written down 1,000 years later, but it wasn't a game of telephone. It was a real skill. And there are all these quotes from the time of Jesus. A true disciple doesn't allow even a syllable to fall onto the ground from the mouth of his master. What do you have to do when you're bar mitzvah? You have to memorize a book of the Bible in Hebrew. You know, so memory was so important. And so it is this memorization of those stories told from one to another. And as one sage hears it, they think, that makes this make sense. Oh my God, that's who Azazel was? Where did you hear this? And they trace that lineage of memorization back to one of their original ancestors who fled from Egypt. They knew where they got the story from going all the way back. It was that important that it was part of that. So the fact that it was written down and attributed to Enoch, we don't know who wrote it down. But perhaps that story has been coming from Enoch, if we look at it that way.
Sure. Now let's get back to sons of God. Sons of God, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's supposed to be fallen angels. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that would mean spirit, yes?
There'd be half and half.
So they would have some kind of flesh to them?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Because that's my question is going to be, how can spirit lay with flesh and bone?
And I have all these theories, and I've almost done with my novel, and the main character is a Nephilim, so I'm trying to be careful about not giving away secrets. But
well, did I touch on something?
Yeah, wait till you read it, you'll understand why. But how could spirit, create a human being? Well, how was Jesus born?
Right.
Yeah, half Holy Spirit. So in essence, the child would have the DNA of the mother. But the angelic substance, angels are creatures. So the idea was that the angels, even though they don't have fleshly bodies, do have a body. They do take up space. They do move. They do have some kind of physicality. Only God is pure spirit. And so the understanding was that, yes, this is certainly possible. They believed demons could have children with human beings. So they believed angels could too.
When you're talking about demons, you're talking about incubus, succubus.
Incubus and succubus, yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right.
So would your offspring have, I guess, a spirit part of them?
They wouldn't have a human soul. And that's the key. And when you're ready, we could talk about that. But the Nephilim were one of the prevailing theories of where demons came from. They don't have human souls, and only human souls can be redeemed, which is why, demons, even though theoretically they can't be redeemed because Christ came to redeem human souls. So they would have an angelic nature inside of a fleshly body.
So their spirit form would dominate their flesh form.
Yeah,
having to be going to heaven.
One would presume that they were immortal in some way, but the belief was, and this is interesting, the Jewish belief, and there are legends that were written down much later about the Nephilim, they were sterile. So they were children, but they themselves couldn't have children.
That kind of falls into the old Highlander thing.
Yeah, exactly. I found that fascinating, but
it's actually, and I don't mean to touch on the Highlander stuff,
but it's interesting.
It's weird how all these stories, and it's because I do the ghost tours and stuff like that, right? There's an ounce of truth to so many stories, and they gather up, and there's always a little bit of bull to it, but there's some weird ounce of truth to these things. It's just weird.
It's fascinating how many religions around the world that had no contact with each other have a flood story, have a story of giants.
Right.
All of them. Gilgamesh, there were all these stories of giants, and you can say, well, maybe they assumed that everything could be big, but why specifically evil giants?
Right. Now one other question, and then we're going to get into Steve's questions in a minute. Adam. I read somewhere that some people believe that Adam was originally a giant.
Yeah. And I believe that comes from a misunderstanding of Adam Kadmon. I don't know if you've heard of that. The Kabbalah, the mystical Judaism, believed that the original Adam was in every way sort of an encompassment of the universe. And so when they, and everybody's seen this, it's sort of like a crystal where they talk about the 10 aspects of God: crown, mercy, strength, right arm. Well, over that crystal in Kabbalah, they draw a human figure, and that's Adam Kadmon. That is the Adam's Adam. That's kind of like the perfect human being that overlays the Godhead. So I think that I think oftentimes people who, and forgive me, I'm not being mean, but who don't know quite enough to be able to put the pieces together will read one thing and run with it, not understanding the context. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know how tall Adam was. Adam's flesh was spiritualized flesh. It's what we're going to have at the resurrection. So he really didn't occupy space and yet did. He was immortal and yet wasn't. It's very confusing to think about this because the Garden of Eden was outside of time. There was no decay. We didn't get old. We didn't die. We saw God. It was a completely different thing. And when Jesus comes, he reverses everything that happened and gives us Eden back. So we'll have the body Adam did when we die. So frankly, I mean, he really could have been a giant, but after the fall, he was pretty much human like the rest of us, but a fallen human with flesh that's just annoying and suffering and backaches and all that happy stuff.
The normal wear and tear of life.
Exactly.
All right. One of the things, go ahead, Steve. What were you going to say?
I got a question about Eden, right? I know it's off limits and in some ways guarded, right? Like we can't return to it. It was
guarded.
Oh.
It's heaven.
It's heaven. Okay.
And when Christ came, it was opened up again.
It was opened up again. Okay. Interesting. Now I can piece that together and I understand that. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
I was looking at Eden as a separate place from heaven, but it makes sense that it would be heaven.
Yeah, and there's really this beautiful symmetry to what Christ did. You know, for example, Adam and Eve fell because Adam wouldn't repent. God asked 3 times, why are you hiding? Why are you scared? Who told you you're naked? And Adam won't fess up. He blames Eve. And God, the woman you put here.
You did it.
And, you know, yeah, it's hysterical. It's really funny. But go ahead. Go
no
ahead.
Fig leaves in heaven?
No.
Oh, okay. So we're just walking around in our heavenly body, right? And it's
you had to, when they fell.
Yeah.
That's when, what happens when we eat of the fruit of the tree of good and evil?
Right.
What did we get when we did that?
Ego,
we took on ourselves the ability to judge right from wrong without knowing what God knows.
The nature
and what flowed from that: shame, fear, anger, blame. The 4 big, horrible emotions that cause us to sin.
Is that where we got what we call the ego, in a sense?
A lot of people believe that. In fact, psychologists sometimes, there was this whole movement to read the Bible as the story of our own self-actualization. Like we became moral beings and we came into our own and we developed ego. The ego's not bad. it's what we are. It's when you become proud and arrogant and overbearing. But, you know, that when we die, ego dies, consciousness lives on.
Interesting.
C.S. Lewis said, when you get to heaven, you'll surprised at how little of you there is there.
Now, Sons of God, once again, and I keep talking about it, I know.
No, go ahead.
Sons of God. Now, do you think it's a little blasphemy when they say sons of God, and when there's only one true son of God, and he's the cornerstone for Christianity? Is that wrong for them to be going out and putting out that word? Because angels were not sons of God. The only son of God that's ever really in the Bible is Jesus of Nazareth. Am I correct?
Well, the sons of God reference, until Christ comes, there are many references to a son of God. Abraham is called the son of God. Adam is referred to later in Scripture as the son of God. The kings of Israel and Judah were called sons of God. So, if you read Psalm 89, the sons of God looks like a council of gods, almost.
So that's basically Old Testament.
Yes, it's all Old Testament. But the sons of God meant heavenly beings, the hosts and powers of heaven, until Christ came. You have to understand it, in the Old Testament, as Christians, we look back at the Hebrew Bible and we see echoes of what would come in the New Testament. So just as there are references like the binding of Isaac, when Abraham goes to sacrifice his son Isaac, what happens? Isaac carries the wood that he's going to be sacrificed on his back. He asks his father, Father, where's the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says, because there are no commas in Hebrew, the Lord will provide himself the sacrifice. And then God provides himself the sacrifice later. So there are echoes of the New Testament in the Old. They just don't reach the level of fulfillment that the New Testament does. And so referring to beings in heaven as sons of God, that would come into perfection when God himself, the Son of God, would come. So no, it's not blasphemous. It's an echo. What God does is eternal, and it ripples outward in time. And so there are echoes of it before it happens, just as there are ripples in a lake in all directions.
Okay. And then last thing on Sons of God, Christianity. And as we know, Adam and Eve, of course, had children. You had Cain, who killed Abel, and then you had Seth, and they all had children. And it was believed that Seth's lineage were men of faith. And then Cain came from evil, where basically they would call in the Bible heathens. They believe that actually those were the sons of God, and maybe it's being interpreted incorrectly, whereas you had your heathens and you had your men of faith. They're these strong people of faith who eventually are going to meet up and have sex and meet up and have relations. And could it be that these could actually be the sons of God that he's talking about? Because we're dropping from Adam down to his lineage of Cain, Abel, Seth. Abel's out of it, of course. And they're dropping down. And we're somewhere down the road, they start to meet up and they're going to have relations, because they're probably all, in a funny way, are all from the same part of town. And could he, what he saw, what the Lord saw, or God saw, was the reason why? Because he saw heathens and Christians kind of, or men of faith, I shouldn't use the word Christians, or men of faith coming together, which he did not want. Could that have been, and such evil was coming from that? Could that have been the reason they're maybe the sons of God, and that's the reason for the great flood? Well,
there was some theorizing about, because sons of God is very generic, and it can refer to several different situations. The problem is that the Bible the Old Testament has put together several different kinds of stories. And the Nephilim, that's a very specific story, because remember, Bible's not in English, and in Hebrew it means the fallen ones. And the scripture actually refers to what we call the watchers. Mm-hmm. The Book of Enoch gets more specific, that there were two angels, Azazel and Shemahaza, or Samael, and that they started talking, and Azazel falls and teaches us magic. He fell because he taught us magic. Samael fell because he taught us war. And it was Samael and Azazel together who gathered their folks together and go, there's some hot chicks down there. Let's go down, get our freak on. Mm-hmm. And they wind up having the Nephilim. And there are so many indications in Scripture, including the New Testament, that the flood came because humans were crying out against the evil. And when the floodwaters of the Nephilim, and when the floodwaters come, they destroy the Nephilim along with the good, which is interesting because Jesus makes the same references. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Mm-hmm. And it's a Noah reference, right? The just and the unjust. And so it was the flood kills the Nephilim, and it's their souls who become demons. The whole idea of the fall of demons, fall of angels becoming demons, much later. In fact, some of the ancient church fathers, including Paul, who makes a reference to it in Corinthians, including Tertullian, including Ignatius, wrote about the Watchers, the Book of Watchers, that this is where demons came from. There's no church teaching officially that takes either side. You could opt for either. And again, going back to my novel, I say it's all three. There were three falls of Azazel, Samael, and Lucifer. And Lucifer would have been the third chronologically.
I was going to ask, did it happen in that order? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you can look at the sons of God in so many different ways, but in the Hebrew, it's very specific as the fallen ones and the giants. Maybe it's a dual reference. There's a spiritual aspect, and these are the fallen angels, and then there's the physical aspect, and this was Cain and Seth's families interacting, because Scripture often has a physical meaning and then a spiritual one. And our world mimics the spiritual world. The Mass is heavenly worship. And so it could be both. I think that we get this either-or mentality. And the really amazing thing about our faith is that it can be both and.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many of these fallen angels, and I'm right after this question, I'm going to lead right into you, Steve, so you can go ahead and ask the angel question.
Yeah, I've got a question on this too, but I'm curious if you got the same. If you got the same question.
How many angels are there?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's a specific number.
28 is what I think I read on the book.
No, there was more than that. I don't have, well, I actually do have Enoch in front of me. It would take me a minute to find. But there is a specific number. If I pull up my PowerPoint, it's going to knock you guys off.
Let me ask you this. While you're looking that up, let me ask this question. If there's a number on it, is there certain names to these demons that cause certain disruption in people's lives? Is there meaning behind these names of these fallen angels?
Yes.
That cause disruption?
Who is Ahiram is, we know the names of 3 Nephilim, specifically. They were written down in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were discovered in 1940. And it was part of the Qumran community, a community that began about 500 years before Jesus and existed about 200 years after. And John the Baptist was a member of this community. It's pretty clear. Ahiram means my brother is exalted. And then you have Ohiah and Hachiah, and they're related to the verb to be. but we don't know specifically what they meant. Then there's Shemahaza, who is also Samael, and he's one of the ones who was the father of Ohiah and Chai and then Ahiram. So we know some of the names. When it comes down to demons, I couldn't tell you how many names there are. There are so many different names, and each name, this one's an archduke, this one's a prince, he has 6 legions, he has 500 legions, right. This one's an archdeacon. It's insane. So yeah, we actually know the names. We know what a lot of the names mean too. There's Mastema, who is the major demon in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then, you know, of course, you have Lucifer and Azazel and Samael, and it's fascinating. And so many of the names are for the same entity, but people pull them all apart and they're like, these are 5 different demons. And I'm like, nope, they're the same guy. They just have lots of different names because your average person spoke 3 or 4 languages at the time because so many empires kept conquering empires.
Right. You're exactly right. Now, so Steve, you're going to ask some questions about the angels. Please go ahead.
Well, the first question, and I get that this is kind of we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper. You were talking about like a spiritual essence and a fleshy existence. Like, I guess a lot of these fallen angels are male, if that makes sense. But I know that they don't really necessarily have a physical body. So maybe they mated with women, right? And so there might be something. Yeah, I'm just curious about the nature of referring to them as male. Or were they all male? Or were there female? Does that even exist in the angelic realm?
In the angelic realm, their angels are neither gender and neither are demons. They could be both. If you read the books by some of the major demonologists, and demonologists and exorcists are different things, when you read the books of the people who studied that from the Middle Ages onward through the witch crazes, this is interesting. In the Catholic Church used to put out what's called penitentials, and it used to list what penance you would give someone for what confession. A person who had sex with a demon, even if a child was born, was not accused of heresy or being a demon or Satan worshiper or anything like that. They were given penance for bestiality because demons can't have bodies. Yeah. So how do they have bodies? They believe they possessed dead bodies and animated them. That was the belief.
So
for 1,500 years, that's where demons, incubi, and succubi, because you were having sex with a corpse. You saw, because they can affect your mind, you saw what they wanted you to see. You felt what they wanted you to feel.
Right.
But it was a corpse.
Wow.
And every piece of literature from the year 400 all the way through the year 1695, same thing.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
That is disgusting. That's not interesting. But I mean,
you would see some beautiful woman. She could switch between male and female. So the thing about angels is they're often, angel isn't a creature. Angel is an office. It's a job. They're angelos, which means being sent. They're always in motion. So, you know, Gabriel means strength of God. Michael means who is like God. Raphael means healing of God. They could be male or female. And some of the best depictions I've seen look very androgynous. I think of Gabriel in the movie Constantine, or the Satan figure in The Temptation of the Christ. You know, you see them and they're androgynous because they're both and neither. But the demons could affect your senses so that you saw one or the other regardless of the dead body they inhabited.
Right.
Right. Like take for instance the incubus and the succubus. The succubus comes as a female, and at first it's very pretty, and it falls off the old thing of the hag syndrome.
Yeah.
Whereas people believe that they're in this dream, they're having sex with this beautiful woman. And during, and I don't mean to sound vulgar, but during the climax part of something like that, that's when they take on their real form. Why? Because they got what they got.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why they call it hag. Now all of a sudden you've seen this hag, which is a witch. And then they go ahead and they convert into an incubus, which then has sex with a female. That could come as maybe that lady's or that female's one that she truly loves or infatuates about.
Exactly.
And then plants their seed inside. Am I correct?
Yep. Yes. And incubus and succubus had another name. They were called mares. The mare was the spirit that came to you at night, and that's where we get the term nightmare.
Ooh.
Really? I didn't
know that.
I love
Old English, a mare was a spirit that came to you at night.
Interesting.
So that's where we get that.
So I had a nightmare has another meaning.
Yes, exactly. I had a visitation from a demonic force, a spirit.
Right. So good to know.
So these, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's talk about different kinds of angels, right? Oh, before I even get into that, I got a question that just sort of like popped in my head. And I kind of been thinking about it, right? Enoch was supposed to have, some people say he became an angel, Metatron and I'm not sure if that's everybody agrees on that, or where
there's a sentiment that humans, when they die, can become angels, and in a metaphorical sense, yes, but it's like a giraffe becoming an elephant. We're completely different creatures. So Enoch didn't become Metatron, but in the Book of Enoch and also in, oh my gosh, Jubilees, which is another apocryphal work, the Apocalypse of Moses, one of the others that's escaping me, I think the Book of Adam and Eve. Metatron is God's scribe. Right. Metatron sits at the feet of God and writes down what God says for the heavenly books. Metatron is mentioned in the Old Testament in the book of Daniel, and Daniel actually has a lot of echoes from Enoch. Whoever wrote both, they're attributed to Old Testament figures, but they were clearly informed of each other's existence because the language is almost identical. And Metatron and Michael are both mentioned in Daniel.
Interesting. A lot of angels, people think of them as like people with wings, right? And Neal and I were researching this a bit, and we learned that there's actually like 3 spheres, if you will, of angels.
There's 3 spheres of 3 hierarchies. They're called choirs or hierarchies, so 9 total. Right.
And we were looking at some of these, and like the first sphere, the ones that are closest to God, we learned about something called the Seraphim.
The Seraphim are the highest.
Yeah, and they look like, this is a depiction of it, right?
Yep.
With 6 wings, 2 for flight, 2 covering the eyes and 2 covering the legs.
Exactly. And it says it's covering their feet. Okay. But bear in mind, in the Old Testament and Semitic tradition, the feet was a euphemism for genitalia.
Oh.
So when Adam's mistress uncovers his feet, she's not uncovering the toes. It's a Hebraic phrase.
It's censorship, Neal.
But what you just showed, the wings aren't covering his feet, are they? They're covering his midsection.
Yeah. Interesting.
But yes, and if you look at the depiction of the thrones, they're just giant eyes with 6. Yeah, exactly.
These are in that first sphere, right? The thrones.
The first sphere of 3 hierarchies. Yes,
right.
There's Seraphim, which means the burning ones.
Right.
And the theory is that Lucifer was a seraphim, although there was debate between Bonaventure and Saint Aquinas, because the question was, the next row is cherubim.
Right.
And the question was Lucifer's fall a sin of love or a sin of wisdom, of intellect? Because cherubim means the wise ones. Mm-hmm. Which would be worse, perverted love or perverted intellect? And so the two debated, but it was perverted love that won out. So they said Lucifer had to be a seraphim.
What was Lucifer's sin attributed to ego? Yes.
Ego, and it depends on how you view it. It was all 7 deadly sins wrapped in one, because he was proud. He wouldn't bend his knee to a human being because we were elevated when God took on our image. He wanted to be his own God. He, turned his back on God. He was angry that God created us because he felt we were a replacement. So he was angry. He was jealous. He was gluttonous for power, slothful in his love of God. I mean, that's, in fact, in the Middle Ages, the 7 deadly sins were considered Lucifer's daughters, actual demons who were his daughters. So yeah, it's the ultimate ego story, because in the end, and again, it's a line from my novel, but I say it all the time, in the end, all the devil ever really wanted was for God to admit that he was right. And he was right about us, because Satan is a Hebrew word. It means accuser.
Right.
Ho-Satan, the Satan, is the devil, but there were little s's, little Satans, little accusers. And if you read Revelation chapter 12, Satan is accusing us before the throne of God, pointing out our sins. And then Michael walks in as our defense attorney and pleads the cross. And the choir in heaven says he's cast out. The accuser of our brothers is cast out, and his place is found in heaven no more. But woe to you, earth, for he is falling to you, and he is wrathful.
Right.
So that accusing thing, he wants God to recognize that he's right about us. We're not worth it. That's all he wants.
So when we die, right, you mentioned that we have an ego death experience. So we no longer have that sense of ego. And you also mentioned that ego wasn't necessarily a bad thing, right?
Right.
And kind of on my journey right now, I'm kind of at a point where is ego actually like the echo of the devil in our mind? And if we lose that when we die, is that like our salvation in a sense?
Jesus said that he who seeks to save his life will lose it, but he who loses his life for my sake will find it. That's really about ego death. It's really about us learning how to set aside our self-interests, because there's a difference between being a selfist and selfish. There's a difference between being assertive and being aggressive. An aggressive person just runs up to you and pushes you down, but an assertive person stands their ground, and as you run at them, you hit them and fall. Because they've stood their ground. Paul said, in the end, just stand. Just stand. And so there's nothing wrong with ego. What you have to understand is, there's your brain and then there's your mind. There's the hardware and there's the software. And so much of our ego is bound up with, our experiences, our trauma, the neurons misfiring, the chemicals going wrong. We are in so many ways an elusive self. Our perception of the world is completely inaccurate. Our brain makes everything up for us. The world is actually silent. There's nothing to see. There's no such thing as color, but our brain puts it all together and creates this whole tapestry out of nothing but photons of light and waves, wavelengths of sound. And it does it so perfectly that we don't even notice it's doing it. So that's really, ego is so connected to our illusion of who we think we are.
Okay.
And when the brain dies, and we don't have that anymore, all we have is our consciousness. It's a completely different experience. I happen to believe that that's what purgatory is for. Purgatory is the process of purging away what little ego there is left of us.
Interesting.
Let me stop you for 1 second, Archbishop and Steve. All right, we have to take a break. And with this break, we're bringing in Into the Shadows with Shell.
Attention, all lost souls. It's time to get into the shadows with Shell.
Nephilim by Laura Leiser. In those primitive times of long, long ago, when Behemoth wandered the land, when mankind was wicked and ruthless and raw, and battles were ever at hand, an unruly unrest reigned on the earth, and rebellion was wild and free. For God turned his back on the people he made, and regretted what they became to be. On the blackest of nights, on the darkest of days, fallen angels were cast from the skies. Then, entering into the daughters of men, a new race began from on high. So the Nephilim roamed, those aliens of old, a people of lusts and desires, warriors all, great giants so tall, reigning with bloodlust and fire, a ruthless tribe with dark hearts inside. In chaos they spread misery and hate, but in due time God's patience was tried. Hence the great flood would seal their fate. In a humbler man a new chapter began, for in Noah God renewed all mankind with a rainbow so bright and a heavenly light, filled with hope and new promises to find. Thank you.
And now, back to the Paranormal Guys podcast.
All right. I hope you enjoyed Into the Shadows with Shell. Now, we're going to start talking, Archbishop, about like the Nephilim and Giants. Now, this is what I read, and this is the knowledge that I've received, is that these things were written as 300 cubits, which is, a cubit is 18 inches, 400 feet tall. Is that even a possibility? And God help the poor woman who had to give birth to something like this.
Well, remember, it was a baby at one point.
Sure, that's what I said. I said, well, I don't think it popped out at 450. I mean, even Andre the Giant came out a baby.
Yeah, it's so, but the thing about numbers in scripture is that they're never to be taken literally. People take the 144,000 mentioned in Revelation, and then they think there's going to be 144,000 people saved. And no, in Judaism, all numbers have symbolic meaning to the Hebrew alphabet and vice versa. And there are certain numbers that always mean one thing. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that the number 40 appears in the Bible all the time?
Right.
What in nature happens in 40s? Something we've all experienced. Pregnancy.
40
is
weeks.
Exactly 40 weeks. So every time you see the number 40, you begin with a seed and you end with a new creation. 40 years in the desert. Jesus was in the tomb for 40 hours. 40 days Jesus was tempted. So there's a seed and then a new creation at the end. So these numbers had significance. Was it actually 40 years? Probably not. But that number was significant because, they didn't use history as a science. The truth was more important than the fact. And those are two different things. They used metaphors. They used story conventions. They used phrases. So in saying that this was 300 cubits high, 3 is a very significant number. It's a number of power. Trinity, the 3 men who show up with Abraham in Scripture. And then 100 is an intensifying number. So they're trying to show you this is strength. This is pure power in these things. Right. So 300 cubits, it's a powerful being. It's the most powerful. And that was what was important to convey to the reader. They'd have recognized that immediately.
Literal versus figurative.
Exactly.
So then, they actually, I guess they had in the King James Bible where God was depicting King Og, who it was after the flood, the size of his bed, something about his brass, the brass of the bed, if I remember reading it correctly, and it came out to like 13 feet in height, 9 feet in width. So my question is to people who believe that it's a figurative thing of 450 feet, why would they have the king of these giants, a guy who's maybe 13 feet tall or maybe 10 feet tall, and why would they have the smallest guy be his king?
Well, Og wasn't a king of giants. Og was a Hittite king.
Right,
so,
but he was considered the lineage of giants.
Yes, so he was taller than most, but you also have to understand that giant didn't mean what it does to us today. It was a way, any kind of amplification was given to a king. And honestly, what you've described would be about the size of a royal bed. Again, that literalism, Og was huge, and I'm sure he was a big man. But whenever you have a king, everything is amplified. They're the wisest. They're the biggest. They're the strongest. They're the most gorgeous. Right. So was he really a tall man, a man of tall stature? Perhaps. But if he had anything good going for him, there's this what's called Semitic hyperbole. Just like today in today's scripture reading, Jesus said you have to hate your father and mother. It didn't mean you have to hate them emotionally. It's hyperbole. It's to strike home, the importance of what I'm saying to you. So they would have understood it that way. Like
when they say also that they were as big as oaks.
Yes.
They mean that an oak tree, it's like if you or me, like I'm a short guy, if all of a sudden I come up to a guy who's 6'8", I feel like an ant compared to this guy.
Exactly.
That's all it really truly is. These guys were just really big guys. They were not something that's out of a Jack and the Beanstalk type thing.
Right. Exactly. And we have idioms too today. If someone comes in and tells me something ridiculous and I say, get out of here, I don't mean leave the room. They're idioms. They're things that the audience understands, but, we're talking about 3 dead languages 5,000 years ago. So we don't, we don't really know all the idioms that they used and what they meant at the time.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is about the giants is that the word Nephilim, okay? It could also mean people of strength or like heroes or anything like that, correct?
Well, they said that in the book of Genesis, when it talks about the Nephilim, it said, and these were the heroes of old. All right, so it's talking about almost like a time before time. And it's interesting because that's actually almost a Greek reference. It's almost a Babylonian reference. I think that is referencing the heroes of the surrounding peoples. So the Babylonians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, the Sumerians, they all had stories of giants too. So I think this is a reference of because every people, especially in Judaism and Christianity, demonizes everybody else's gods. It's just done.
Right.
Their gods are demons. In fact, they believed before the time of Christ, they said that it was the horse goddess of Egypt, whose name is escaping me, who becomes a tiger. She was the demon that killed the firstborn in Egypt at the Passover. So the surrounding gods were always demonized. Lamishtu. I don't know if you've heard of Pazuzu and Lamishtu. Pazuzu is the demon that supposedly possessed the child Regan in The Exorcist. Pazuzu is pictured on something called the Mediterranean Hell Tablet, and he's just this weird-looking tiger thing. Pazuzu's wife was Lamishtu. Demons in other cultures were not good or bad. It depended on whether or not you made them happy or not. They were all indifferent. All the gods were indifferent. Pazuzu was married to Lamishtu. During an exorcism, Pazuzu's a demon. And during exorcisms on this hell tablet, it shows him whipping his wife Lamishtu to leave a possessed person. And Lamishtu was also called Lilu, who was also called Lilith, who was also called Lilith. So, you know, it depended, but demonizing other people's gods, like the god of the Hittites, the Redeemer, the half god, half human, his name was Baal. And we see lots of that in the Old Testament too, the Baals. Stop following the Hittite god Baal. You know, it was just common.
Right. Wow. Now I'm going to get into kind of a subject. I think it's kind of off wall, but aliens. Okay. And I'm going to talk about the Book of Enoch with aliens. And Steve, I'm going to reference some of the things that you were talking about.
Okay.
When you were talking about aliens, I mean angels, Steve, you were showing pictures of certain things of that one right there. Now, I'm not a complete believer, but I'm a very open-minded person about thinking about aliens, where I call it the large G, small g equation, where of course there's a God. I believe there is a God. I believe there is an everlasting Lord, God. But what happens if we were actually developed by aliens who become you have large God, which is God, and then you have small g, which becomes a race of people or aliens, we'll say, and then they make another little race of aliens, which we'll say is us, and then they all of a sudden become the large G. And they're having an experiment going on what happens if some of these things that people were seeing as angels were maybe like almost like drones? Because look at some of these pictures. People are depicting it as seeing like an eye. Now, when we look at some of the drones that we see around here, it's like a camera. Well, we all know it's a camera, but we don't know. But back in the day, they didn't know what those things were. Now, if you went back 30 years from now and flew around a drone, went back in time and flew around a drone, people be wondering what the hell alien thing is that?
I mean, I'd like to have a drone like that. That would be really cool. It'd be like virtual reality. It would be capturing everything in 360.
I know, right? That's what I'm saying. Is I sometimes when I see things like that, like certain pictures of things, is it that maybe there's an alien aspect to some of this stuff? What do you think, Archbishop?
Well, first, the description of those things, like the eyes everywhere, the thrones were sort of God's intake, sort of sensory intake. Do thrones really look like that? No, they probably resemble, angels are probably most like scientifically photons. You know, that the way they move through space and how they can bilocate and stuff. I believe that aliens are an absolute possibility. When I use the word God, though, I'm like a god to an ant. I'm so other that they would never understand me. I have the power to smush them or to let them live. But am I a god? No. Like Carl Sagan said, you know, or may have been Isaac Asimov, if someone's so much more advanced than us, they'd look like magic. They'd be like gods. A science so advanced would appear as magic to a lesser civilization. So I think that that's perfectly possible. Ultimately, I mean, I believe that God used evolution to get us to where we are. Why wouldn't God use some form of adaptation in our environment to create us? So while I don't buy certain aspects of panspermia, that aliens, you know, created all these different races, if it did, it wouldn't bother me. What if people looked at something strange like a UFO and said, oh my God, it's the chariot of Ezekiel. It came down, it snatched him up, it kidnapped him. Does that mean that God doesn't take people off the earth? No, they mistook that particular event for something else. Just like out of the corner of my eye, I might see a light beam pass and mistake it for someone running across the doorway. All right. Does that mean that people don't run across doorways? No, it just means that I mistook it for that.
And that's one of the reasons why I bring up like the book of, why I bring up this subject in the Book of Enoch, because it seems like very fantastic stories, like we talked about at the beginning. Some of these are very fantastic stories. What happens, like we talk about, that there is always some ounce of truth to some of these things. And I'll go back to Adam for a second, is that they talk about they took the rib bone of Adam, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, and they made Eve. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
So from a literal point of view, and then you meaning that you took the rib bone from him, what happens if there is that ounce of truth where that did happen, and they say it's a very strong, rich part of DNA that is being pulled out from the rib bone?
Like some stem cells?
Like
out
a stem cell.
Bone marrow? Yeah.
And what happens if, like I said, large G, small g equation, the small g are now making the other small g, and they know that the rich part is coming from the rib bone to go ahead and make Eve. What do you think of something like that? Or am I just nuts?
No, that was part of my homily today.
Really?
When Jesus said, you know, the salt of the earth, and you are the salt of the earth, and if salt loses its saltiness. I don't know if you knew this, but our neurons fire because of salt. Right. You know, the reason they fire is because the salt ion enters in, positively charges them, etc. Yeah. What about 40? You know, the pregnancy aspect. There's stuff in Genesis and in the New Testament that I read that I'm like, it's really interesting. How'd they get that right? How'd they know that? Because it turns out scientifically that's kind of a really apt metaphor. And then you realize, well, if Jesus was God, he knew salt was part of what caused us to form. It's part. Right. If we lose who we are as Christians, then what's the point? So I actually think that, ironically, that they do get this right. Understand that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, first 5 books of the Old Testament, are also the Jewish Torah. And that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. God dictated it. Moses wasn't in the Garden of Eden, but the story is that God dictated all of that information, and Moses wrote it all down because it was God who knew it. Well, God would have given that to us in a way that we comprehended, in a way that we could put together. And yes, you lose some of the stories, and they're stitched in by editors later who are like, okay, we have this old tradition. I think it came after this one because this is, you know, they've been sacked and carted away and brought back.
No reason and rhyme. Just things blended together with no reason and rhyme, no really true description.
Exactly, but all part of that much more ancient story that God supposedly told to Moses over the course of 10 years. Moses was on Mount Sinai for 10 years with 70 elders, and he wrote it all down. So, of course, some of it's going to make oddly scientific sense. I'm working on something about that, sort of blending the science and the and religion, because it's mind-blowing. I mean, what if the fall was the Big Bang? Physicality, time, space.
That's an interesting subject.
Right.
You know, and the thing is that with this Book of Enoch and the Bible, of course, and all these different books, this show here would last for years upon years, and we could just keep going on and on.
Oh, yeah.
With so many scenarios. That's actually what the cool thing is that we have our thought into these things, and we're putting our thought into it. And I think it also helps each and every one of us grow and think. You know, I think that's the real just cause, besides for the Bible and books like that, is for us to think.
Yes.
And like you were saying, is that they were all blended together and for a purpose. Well, it's for us to think and maybe put it all together. But you know what? I don't think we have any more time for today to talk about the Book of Enoch or the Nephilim, Archbishop. But I want to definitely have you back, and maybe we can do a backup to this. What do you think,
sure.
Steve? Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. I physically froze. You got me in such deep thought right now. My noodle is racing around, and yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking about questions to ask you for next time.
Okay, great.
And for the audience that's out there, I'm sorry if we didn't ask enough questions, because I know there's a ton of questions out here when it comes to this kind of subject, and I don't think there's enough time in the day to be able to do that.
But you know what? Let them, the folks watching this, and they have questions. We really want to have Bishop Rake on again. Put your questions in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube or if on Facebook, leave some comments for us, and we will
Q&A.
Yeah, gather them up. And I love Q&A. I love teaching by answering questions. It's how Jesus did it. He just answered questions all day. It's wonderful. I'd be happy
if anybody was to reach out to you, how could they reach out to you, Archbishop?
You can email me, Bishop Rake at AmericanOldCatholic.org. And you can also go to our church website, which is AmericanOldCatholic.org. And we're on Facebook, and you can come and join us for Mass. And now that fall has come, we're going to start Bible study on the end times and Revelation, and do some really wonderful Advent retreats and things like that. So please join us. All are welcome. You do not have to be Catholic. Don't even have to be Christian. You just have to be interested in growing, and maybe we can facilitate that.
All right. And what other things do you have going on besides all of that? Do you have anything, books coming out or anything?
Not quite yet.
But something's coming.
Oh,
I've got two coming. One is the science and religion book, and then the novel should be done very, very soon. And once I get that copyrighted, I'm debating whether or not I should self-publish or get a publisher. I'm not sure yet. I might just self-publish until I get a publisher.
That novel is something I'm very interested in reading. Yeah,
it's really coming out very well. It's the intersection of religion and science and fun and politics and all the computer science, all the cool stuff that I love. Right. So it should be fun.
All right. Well, thanks again, Archbishop, for coming on. Yep. Next week's episode, or the next episode, episode 2, because this is our first episode. And just so you know, Archbishop, you were our first guest.
I know. I'm so honored. That's so awesome.
I know.
We're honored to have you. Yeah.
I thought this would be an excellent subject to talk about on the first one that we've ever had. And I said, this would be the lady to talk to about this.
Oh, thank you.
So I welcome, I say thank you again for everything. And next week's episode is episode 2. We're going to have Mr. Jason Streets on, and we're going to be talking about Satanism.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, dear Lord. Until then, boys and girls, that is Steve. Say goodbye, Steve.
Bye, Steve.
And this is me, always. Boo. All right.